What's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to advice for Americans visiting Britain. He done the opposite of this video about a week ago, and now he did say in that video he was going to do this video, and now it's here. So we're going to see sort of the advice he's giving. I mean, I'm not an American coming to the UK, so I can't say whether it's right or wrong, but it'll be just interesting to see maybe what he thinks Americans shouldn't have to know before they come here, because to me obviously they're just usual things that I know what to do or how it is, or it just wouldn't be a shock for me. Obviously maybe it wouldn't be a shock for Americans even, maybe this is just stuff that people already know, but we're going to see what this video has to say, and let's check this out. Links are also in the description to my Patreon where you can see reactions that I can't post to YouTube. But without further ado, let's check this out and see his advice for Americans visiting the British Isles. Well, I guess just Britain, not just British Isles as well. I guess it could be Northern Ireland, but...
Hello, I'm Lawrence, and I'm
Anyway.
on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to visiting. Specifically, visiting one country while being a resident of the other. If you watched my last video, you'll know that I was tasked with giving British people advice on what to know before visiting the United States. Well, today we're flipping that video, not like that. As a British-born US citizen, I'm going to offer my unsolicited advice to Americans visiting Britain. And so for those of you who are subscribed for part 1 of this series, this is part 2. And for those of you who are not yet subscribed, do that now. In the meantime, here's a rundown of some of the things you'll need to know before visiting my place of birth. The country, not the maternity ward.
Plugs, yeah.
And I'm going to start by talking about plugs. And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Lawrence, you talked about plugs in the last
Oh, he did. He's just doing the opposite
video. Is it really
I mean, it is a difference, but...
worth covering the same ground again? And I think it is. And the first reason that I say that is because I visit Britain more than I visit America. I actually have some props of my own. You see, in my last video, I talked about when British people bring their electronics to America, they need some sort of converter in order to take their British plugs and plug it into an American wall. Well, the same is true for Americans when they visit Britain, except there's a few things.
This is quite a cool little one. You can fit, I guess, one here, one on the other side. I guess maybe one on top. And you got a little USB port as well. Damn. I mean, I've never seen one that you can have all these little, like 4 different, converters. That's pretty insane.
Things that you need to keep in mind. Firstly, voltage. Over the years, I have heard the occasional American express safety concerns over the 230 voltage of UK electrical outlets. This is because in the US, the standard voltage is between 110 and 120 volts. Well,
so does that mean your stuff will, say you're charging your phone, will it charge slower? Is that even affected by the voltage? Because obviously the more voltage, the more power you get. So I assume in turn that helps you charge things quicker, for example, in the UK.
Worry not, the British plug socket is widely regarded to be the safest in the world. And don't take my word for it, Tom Scott did a wildly popular video called British Plugs Are Better Than All Other Plugs, and here's why. But the voltage disparity does mean there is one thing about which Americans should remain wary. Whether or not your device can convert 230 volts to 120. If not, you may need to buy a separate converter. Most American laptop power adapters already have one built in. If it says 110 to 240 volts, you're fine. Secondly, American to British converters usually have 2 plug holes in them. One for your 3-prong plugs and one for your 2-prong plug.
Oh, so you just automatically get 2 anyway. I guess as a positive of the US plug sockets, they're a lot smaller.
Plugs, words are hard. And thirdly, keep in mind that British plug sockets have an outlet switch, which stops and starts the flow of electricity. So if your computer isn't charging, it could be that this switch is flicked off. So a good counter to that is switch it on.
Here you go.
If there's one thing that I know about Americans, it's that they really like to drive.
I think one thing will be here for sure is driving in the UK will be a lot harder. It's a lot more cramped. The roads definitely look a lot smaller from what I've seen, compared to US roads. So it's a lot more cramped. It's probably maybe not busier because everyone drives in the US, but I just think it's harder in the UK. I look at driving in the UK and it's sort of comparing it to the US. It's just you've got a lot more space in the US. Obviously you've got the country is basically built for driving, where the UK is sort of built its cities already, and then it's then built in roads years and years after. So it's definitely not as convenient, or not as, it's just not as like good to do it basically. But I mean, if you're driving on motorways or whatever, it's going to be fine. But within cities, that's when it gets a bit rough.
And if American tourists who've messaged me are to be believed, their driving even extends to when they visit Britain, even though they really don't have to. If that's you, then here are a few things that you'll need to know before driving on British roads. Firstly, and you're probably aware of this already, in Britain we drive on the other side of the road. Additionally, the steering wheel is on the opposite side of the car to what you would expect in American vehicles. And to make matters even more confusing, the name assigned to different car parts can differ as well. Instead of your windshield, you've got a windscreen. Instead of your trunk, it's a boot. And no hoods here. Instead, it's a bonnet. And you don't operate a turn signal. In Britain, this is known as an indicator. Now, something that American drivers often tell me about driving on British roads is that they were surprised by the number of roundabouts. Furthermore, in Britain, we seem to have a better understanding of how these work. See, in America, roundabouts do exist, but they're harder to come by, and when you do, they're almost treated like a novelty. And no driver ever seems particularly confident or knowledgeable about when it's their time to go. So, before visiting Britain, do your research on roundabouts as well as road signs. Because while both countries have pretty similar signs for stop, others might seem quite alien. Take, for example, give way, which means the same thing as yield. Or elderly people crossing the road, because as far as I can tell, the United States does not have an equivalent of this sign.
Oh, I didn't know we had this sign either. I knew we had the sign for like young kids, like in schools and stuff. I didn't know that we had an elderly sign.
Which just instructs drivers to slow down if they see elder pedestrians trying to cross the road. Also, depending on how far west you end up, some road signs might appear in Welsh. This means you've either entered Wales or you're about to. But sometimes you'll encounter the odd, sometimes very odd American tourist who would prefer not to drive and instead get around on buses and especially trains.
Getting around on the train currently would be the least reliable thing. The strikes that we're getting right now and the pricing, they used to be good. They're getting a bit unreliable, to say the least. I mean, it's definitely more than just unreliable, but...
And here's the thing you need to know about Britain's trains. They're quite expensive. This is particularly true when we're not so much talking about the London Underground, but Britain's National Rail. However, there are ways to cut costs on those longer train journeys. The method, known most commonly to British Rail users, is to book 90 days in advance, as the cheaper tickets typically go on sale at that time. The following is not a brand sponsorship, but it is something that my wife and I discovered, and we think that more American travellers should know about. A lesser known method, open only to US residents, is to buy what's known as a Brit Rail pass. These offer good bang for your buck if you're travelling long distances or taking multiple rail journeys. If you're not sure which method is best for you, do some maths. My wife and I have used both methods depending on journey complexity. It just takes a bit of planning, which my wife is really good at. And by the way, it's important that I make this distinction between the London Underground and Britain's National Rail, and here's why. As somebody who used to live in London and has visited many times, I think it's fair to say that London has a lot of things to see. And so by all means, spend a lot of time in London. But if you're able, don't spend all...
God, I get so stressed in London, man. It's too much sometimes. Don't get me wrong, I'll go to London. I mean, I've not actually been to London other than like, obviously going to the airports for... Actually, I went last year for the football. But I used to go a lot more often, but then since I got my passport, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to go to London anymore. But yeah, London is just a lot. I mean, it's probably just like New York, to be honest. I mean, if you're from a big city, you'll be fine with it, but...
all of your time there. Because Britain has so much more to offer than that. What does it have to offer? The Cotswolds, yes. When my wife and I visited a few years ago, we found ourselves in the lovely surroundings of Gloucestershire. Not only did we stumble upon lovely countryside, we accidentally ended up in a cow field. And if countryside is your cup of tea, check out the Lake District, Rick Steves did. Or take in the majesty of the Yorkshire Dales with its rolling green hills that the universe built specifically for your Instagram clout and because it had nothing better to do. Or visit Wales and Scotland. Wales, Scotland. That's right, tipping. And you're probably thinking, Lawrence, in your last video you talked about how American restaurants expect you to tip and in Britain they don't. Why are you covering the same ground? Because while we don't have the tipping culture that the United States has, you can tip if you want. Some servers welcome it. So tipping, while certainly more important to American servers than British ones, is still something you can do in a lot of British restaurants, but just know this. The waiters and the servers will be a lot less hands-on than they are in America. For instance, they probably won't come by your table to ask you how that fish and chips is.
Bro, I hate it. Does happen sometimes. I hate it when they're asked how's your food when your mouth is half like full, or like fully full, even not just half full. When you're like 4 ribs down and like you've just got all like meat in your face and you've got sauce all over you and your fingers are dirty. It's like, yeah, it's great. It's the worst timing. Come on, I'm not wanting to be asked how my food is when I'm literally my face is stuffed. But I do understand why they do it. Although it's just funny how it's always at the most inconvenient times.
Is tasting today. In fact, now that I've jogged my memory, you might struggle to get them to come to your table at all, which can be quite tricky when you've got tickets to go see the Phantom of the Opera in 10 minutes and you just want to pay the bill and get the heck out of there.
The whole world hates
And the final thing that I'm going to talk to you about today.
What, the whole world hates British people? Probably true. I mean, I think it is true, to be honest. Our history definitely does not have us in a positive light for 99% of the world's population.
Is how you as Americans are perceived in
how Americans are perceived in Britain.
In all the years of doing this channel, I've met two kinds of American. The kind that says, I don't give a damn what those redcoats think. Or, the rest of the world doesn't like us. And it's that second viewpoint that I feel compelled here to address. Because what they really mean is the rest of the world doesn't like such and such president. Or the fact that America interferes with the governance of other countries. Something that Britain would never do. In other words, if the British have any level of disdain for Americans, it's mostly politically motivated or linguistically motivated. We don't normally have an issue with Americans themselves. In fact, I'll give you an anecdote. When my American wife and I stayed in a hotel in my English hometown of Grimsby, the staff acted all nervous around her. And not just because we're YouTube sensations, it was because of her accent. Just as Anderson, Indiana doesn't get many British people living there, Grimsby doesn't get many Americans. So I think they just thought she was plucked straight out of Hollywood like Julia Roberts in Notting Hill. And it was a novelty for them. Now, you won't experience this in London. In London, just like the gongs of Big Ben, an American accent is a common sound. But wherever you are in Britain, some people will receive your American accent in a similar way to how some Americans will receive my accent. That it carries a certain amount of glamour, so use that to your advantage or disadvantage. If this two-part video series has reminded me of anything, it is that in addition to living in both countries, I rather enjoy visiting them, and it is made a lot easier with all of this knowledge in mind.
Well, there we go. Here's good advice. Get out of the cities your international flights lands in to see better parts. Americans don't like that. American governments is in everyone's business, including our own. My last trip, 2019, was with a Brit rail pass. London, Birmingham, Sheffield, Liverpool, London, seamless. Buy before you leave the US for the lowest prices. I wouldn't even go to Birmingham. I mean, I've been there once. No, thank you. I'm joking. But hopefully you enjoyed this reaction and let me know your thoughts if you've been to the UK or if you're planning to go. And yeah, how you found it yourself. How was your experience with like people? How were they with you? Did they have you in this aura of like, oh, they're American, or was it the other way around where they didn't like you like straight off the bat? Like, how did you experience British people's company? But yeah, that's that. Until next time, like, subscribe, and peace.